Academy, we had a summer, but 2 out of 3 months we had to do some kind of training. So we were able either going out of Quantico or getting deployed on a ship. I was in Israel once. I was over there when when Iraq invaded Kuwait on August 2nd, 1990. I was at the Sea of Galilee, as a matter of fact, when that happened. So it was kind of an interesting tour I had as a college student. Still, after my first year at the Naval Academy, but you only got like 1 month off, So 2 out of 3 months you had to do something, like do something fun like Officers Candidate School or something like that, which wasn't so fun. But and then you had a month off, so I usually traveled to Europe, with some buddies or something like that, and do the backpacking thing. So I encourage you guys to do that if you have time, while you're still young, before you get married and kids and all that kind of stuff, and start your professional lives and so forth. So there's a lot to learn out there. Getting exposed to that. So anyway, so here we are. So what we're going to talk about, risk analysis and mitigation in a wartime environment. So you can see some of my credentials there, so to speak. But I'll be talking a lot about my experiences in Iraq in 2006 to 2007. So that's a little bit dated, but also bring into some issues that we're currently doing now. Some of the projects I worked with when I was at the Pentagon, and maybe an example of what I'm doing at the State Department, just for an Excel thing. So, and I have to ask, I just saw this cool S2 robot thing. So, what's that all about?
That's my summer job.
Your summer job?
Yeah, so we're working on those and Pleos. Do you know
that? No.
They're like baby dinosaur robots.
Baby dinosaur robots. Well, that's pretty cool. So, what does this robot do then?
You can see that there is a hole in the middle, so you put a pen in there, and then you can program it to do giant designs.
Oh, wow.
And draw them out on paper or whiteboard.
Oh, cool. Well, it's very interesting because I've learned a lot about the robotic community in the last few years when I was at the Pentagon and so forth. So we'll be talking about robots tonight. So that's going to be cool. So let me just say, though, that if there's one thing that you're going to learn tonight, if you learn nothing else, okay, and this is not going to be an answer for your midterm, right? So if you learn nothing else, you know how I just did that? To go to black like that in PowerPoint slideshow? Do you know how I did that? Press B. Well, you are the only person who's ever known that. I've asked that question probably to at least 500 people, and you are the only person that actually knows this. So that must tell you something, huh? You must be like a real geek or something like that. So what happens if you want to go to white then? What do you think? W. So what happens if you want to go to red though? You can't. Wow, he actually knows all that stuff. Yeah, I'm typing R for red and there's no red, but if I type W for white, then you can kind of do some cool things with that, I guess. If you know all that hand stuff. But yeah, so you can actually go to black if you want to. So anyway, here's the outline for the topics of tonight. So I'm going to set the stage a little bit with some of the things that we talked about in Iraq. And I'm coming from the logistics community, so my focus of effort is going to be on convoys. So you'll see this train of thought on this risk mitigation stuff related to convoys from 2006 all the way to the present day. All right, so we're talking 6 years here. So this is a very important issue to the Marine Corps, because IEDs kill our guys, and we want to reduce that risk as much as possible. And this is what we talk about today. And the things that we did over in Iraq to help alleviate and reduce that kind of risk to our convoys over there. And it's an ever-evolving kind of thing. So when I gave this lecture last time in 2007, we were I think we did a pretty good job at that point. But we've actually improved quite a bit, since then. And it's good to see that we continue to evolve and be creative in how we kind of do this kind of stuff. And then graduate skills in action. You guys aren't. I thought you guys were going to be at the graduate level, but you guys are so smart. You should be in graduate school, I guess, right? So, how many people are going to go to graduate school after they get done with their undergraduate? Right away? You're going to go right away then after that?
We do have a couple of people who are graduate students, right?
Oh, I do. Oh, okay. Oh, great. All right. So, hey, cool. All right. So we got some even smarter guys there. And so what I'm going to talk about in this section of tonight's brief is some of the things I've learned over the years when it comes to using Excel as a tool to make better decisions. I'm sure a lot of you guys are pretty familiar with Excel. You may have not done so much with data analysis type of stuff, so I'm going to try to bring some of that stuff out. I'm going to try to bring out some good design techniques that you can take with you for the rest of your careers, wherever that may go. And in addition to that, we're also going to be talking about dashboards, business intelligence type topics, because that's kind of like the next evolution of some of this analysis stuff, is how do you actually present that in a clear, coherent, I'm not very clear right now, but clear and coherent manner. So, okay, so let's talk about setting the stage. So this is a quote from Ronald Reagan. I guess you guys can read that, okay, but, being in Iraq with the Marines was a real special time in my life. It's the best year I've had in the Marine Corps, bar none. And I think when most people think about going to a wartime environment and being in combat and stuff like that, they probably get a little nervous about that. I guess I'll say I was probably a little nervous too going out there, because I've never been in that kind of environment before. And but it turned out to be like a great experience for me, and it was fantastic with the Marines that I had working for me and stuff, and we did some really good things. And that's the kind of stuff that you don't hear necessarily on the news back here, what actually is happening over there when you're actually at Camp Fallujah in Iraq. So anyway, let's talk about this a little bit. For those who don't know, Iraq is about the size of California. So you can see an overlay here, and also has like 36 miles of coastline as well. So it's a pretty big area. And the area that we had was called Al Anbar Province, all right? And I was stationed in Fallujah as a home base for the 1st Marine Expeditionary Force out of Camp Pendleton, California here. And I was there for 3 years at one map, and one of those years I spent in Iraq. So that was our home base, and then we had units scattered throughout Anbar Province. And this is at the time probably the worst place in the world to live, all right? Between Fallujah and Ramadi especially, violence is very high. So geographically speaking, what does it look like? A lot of it looks like this, all right, frankly. It's the Syrian desert. It spans the vast majority of Al Anbar province, and it's very flat, and most of it's uninhabited. So there are some geographical features there, like the Euphrates River Valley, for instance, and this is one of the things that Iraq has that most countries in the Middle East don't have, and it's not necessarily oil, it's actually water. All right, so you probably remember from your childhood days, if you took Western civilization, about Mesopotamia, Fertile Crescent, and so forth. I mean, this is where it's at right here, and I have a few pictures myself, next to the Euphrates River in Ramadi, and that was kind of cool. It's like, wow, I learned about this as a kid, growing up in a small town in Western New York, and now I'm actually here, so it was kind of a cool experience to see that. Luckily, I didn't get shot at, but that's another thing. So when it comes to religion obviously is a very big deal over there. For Al Anbar province, they're 90% Sunni. So you got the Sunnis versus Shia, and that led to a lot of sectarian violence that was over there. Al Qaeda was very trying to promote all that kind of stuff. And when it comes to the tribes are very much a big influence on the daily life of the folks in Iraq. All right. And they are basically like the law in a lot of cases. In a lot of cases, there are no other kinds of government other than the tribes that do that. And this played a very big role later on in my tour at the end of, at the beginning of 2007, at the end of my tour, where our efforts to work with the tribal sheikhs really was starting to pay dividends. Okay, there's an incident that happened where Al Qaeda was, they actually killed a tribal sheikh, and they didn't bury the body that right. They didn't, do all the necessary things. And it was at that point where things started to shift. Where the tribes that were associated with Al Qaeda now started to look towards the Americans and the coalition as the way to go for their future in Iraq. And frankly, the local Iraqis just had enough. The bloodshed that was happening, and it was like one of those kind of watershed moments, where you just kind of saw momentum kind of build after that. And the folks that replaced us at the 2nd Marine Expeditionary Force out of Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, they continued to gradually promote that. And by the next year, when one MAF came over, the violence was down probably close to 90%. Basically because the sheikhs and the tribes took control, right? So that was a big deal for all that. These are the different units. These are all out of Camp Pendleton, except for the Army that we had located with us. And this is like what I was alluding to before. Al Qaeda had this murder intimidation campaign, and we see this in Afghanistan still and other places. So they're out there to try to instigate violence as much as they can, and try to show that their way is the way to go down the road. And we see the same kind of tactics in Mexico as well. The drug cartels and so forth, they're doing the same kind of thing. A little bit of history here. In 2004, we had a huge battle in Fallujah with the Marines that took over the city. And we didn't really want to repeat that whole kind of effort again. In 2005, Second Meth sealed the border. A lot of foreign fighters are coming out of the Syrian border through the Euphrates River Valley and so forth. So the first step was to really seal the border to prevent more foreign fighters from coming in. So that happened before we got there. Then we came in. So our effort, our real mission was clear Ramadi and the Euphrates River Valley, and we did that throughout the course of the year there. So this is me in front of my trailer. So I basically worked out of a trailer for 13 months over there in Camp Fallujah. These are some of my guys that I worked with. And what we did was we did distribution of supplies, and we managed all the different bases and their convoys. So every single base has like a truck stop, all right? So you think about truck stops here in the United States, we had a similar kind of thing. So we had to have, people to help secure that. So we had Marines out there to help expedite our different logistics supply convoys coming out. This is the inside of my trailer. These are my guys working on the computer. So this is kind of like what it looks like sometimes in a wartime environment, They're not always necessarily out there on patrol doing different things out there in the town. A lot of times, a lot of this work and effort that supports those guys out there is done inside of trailers like this. So you see a lot of computers, a lot of different command and control systems that we had to track movements. Our convoys are tracked by GPS, so we can actually plot that out on an electronic map, so you can see where they're at all times. So that's part of our process and how we did all that. And not just unclassified network like what you have, that we use as the internet, but also on the classified networks as well. So we have a lot of information on the, what we call the high side, that you don't want to have access for all the enemy in the sea and so forth. So that's, most of our work was actually done on the high side. So that's a much higher level of security. This is my office that I worked out of. See, I had maps of Iraq, and you can see the different road networks and the train routes and so forth that we had over there. And so that's kind of like an overview of where we're at. All right, so that was kind of the setting of the stage for our time in Iraq. And you may have seen this before. Have you seen this graphic before at all about risk? I don't know. Okay, so this is I think from Kersner. This is basically the 6 different kinds of things when it comes to like risk management for a project. And I'm going to take these buckets and look at how we kind of apply this kind of stuff to convoys, all right? So this is what we're going to do. Okay, so what's our mission? We need to get supplies from point A to point B and, reduce the threat of IEDs. So I'll show you a video in a few seconds here about some of that kind of stuff. But that's what we have to do. So there's you kind of follow the guys that came before you, and you try to pick up the pieces where they may have not necessarily have done everything so good, and you try to improve upon things. I mean, that's the bottom line. You take the existing process, you kind of get settled in, and then after a month or so, you got to look at things and you try to re-examine things, to see where you can make a difference and make things better. So another thing here too is IEDs are the #1 killer of Marines and soldiers. So convoys are soft targets. So imagine you're driving down I-5 or the 405, and all of a sudden you got a boom, like an explosion that happens right next to you. So it can be a pretty dramatic experience. And I've been on my fair share of convoys, but luckily I never had an IED attack next to me, because it would have been a bad day if that would have happened. So the things that we were in charge of was what's called admin or logistics convoys. So the convoys that are going out there to resupply all these different bases. So these are some of the most dangerous roads, in the world at the time. And these guys are out there day in and day out, slugging it out on the roads over there, to provide the kinds of critical supplies, food, water, chow, ammunition, those kinds of things to the people that need it. So it's a big distribution network kind of thing. So that's what we do as logistics guys. And basically the bottom line, they're risky events. So we have all these steps in place to try to reduce that risk down. We kind of fell in and out of process, when we got there, but then we also wanted to look at how we can improve upon that. So that's what we talk about tonight. So traditionally when I graduated from the Naval Academy and became a second lieutenant, this is the kinds of things that we learned, that it's like it's us against them kind of thing, against the enemy. and the FIBAs, the forward edge of the battle area. You know, we're back here in the rear. We got these supply routes to go out and, you know, resupply the companies out there forward and the larger units after that. And it's very linear, okay? This is definitely not the case in Iraq, okay? After we did our initial push into Iraq, things kind of settled in, you know? So now we're everywhere across Iraq. And you can see on this one, you have this entire road network that goes around Iraq. So some of the major ones are going east to west and also north to south. So it goes up to Turkey, to Syria, the borders Iran, borders to Saudi Arabia down here, and the main one down here is Kuwait. So most of our logistics convoys came out of Kuwait because we could use that as a staging area for the ships that came in with lots of these different kinds of supplies, and they would offload in Kuwait, get their trucks ready to go, establish these huge, like 100 vehicle convoys, and they would convoy up towards Baghdad and every place else. I mean, as far north as up to here, you know, Mosul. You know, the Army did most of this stuff along here. But for us in the Marine Corps, we had this whole western province here. So any vehicle that came into our battle space, and when I say battle space, I mean the geographical area that our unit is responsible for, anytime a convoy came into that battle space, we had to know about it, all right? Because we didn't want, you know, like you know, somebody else that is infiltrating our battle lines kind of thing. So this is what we had to do. We had to track all this stuff, and there's a process to do that. So typically, what the convoys look like, you know, is a mixture of these big trucks and these little Humvees. You probably heard of a Humvee. You probably haven't heard of a big cargo truck like that, but it's called an MTVR. It has this gun turret at the top. And at the time, in 2006, when we're doing all this stuff, that was pretty much the state of the art, except for a smattering of MRAPs that were around. And that became a huge issue over there. I'm trying to get more, you know. And I used to sit in what's called this counter-ID working group, where we talked about this every week, like how do we reduce the amount of ID attacks, and how do we get things better and safer for our Marines out there, and Army soldiers and Navy sailors, you know, so that we're not getting attacked as much as what we were before. So with the MTVR, it could take, I mean, it was the safest vehicle because it had a little bit of height to it, all right? And that was like really the key critical thing. You look at a Humvee, it's pretty low to the ground, right? And it's flat. It's flat bottom. So when a blast goes off underneath it, it has like full impact, right? So even to the side, you know, during a time mode, we went through like 3 or 4 different iterations of like armor plating for the doors. You know, so we're shipping all this armor plating over from the United States, and then we're like getting it up into Iraq, and you know, we have to like, you know, mount all this stuff on there. So it was a huge logistical challenge, you know, to do all that kind of stuff. And you see all these antennas, and all that stuff means something. You know, either a radio or, you know, some kind of counter ID device, you know, kind of thing. And but the bottom line is you're very vulnerable to that. So if you got hit, you're probably going to be pretty hurt. But with an MTVR, at least you have some standoff distance, and you know, I don't remember. I think maybe one Marine got killed in an MTVR while the whole time they were over there. So that did become the safest vehicle. Okay, on the civilian side though, I mean that's like military gear, like Marine Corps gear. But the vast majority of the trucks though were, you know, trucks like this, driven by guys like that. So our staging area at a place called TQ, I took this picture at our little truck stop, and it's called TQ or Al Taqaidam. And, you know, we're lining them up, you know, so they can get their food for the day. And, you know, this is kind of the way it worked. You know, you line them up in lines, and you get them all staged, and it's like this huge gravel area, very dusty and hot and stuff. And the guys live out there, and I mean, we have to keep them all fenced in and everything. And it's a big effort to make sure that they're fed and watered and showered and all that kind of stuff, you know. So, you know, these are the kinds of trucks that are going out there, and then we have to provide security for these guys. So that's part of our process. You know, you got all these commercial white trucks, we say, but then you have to add in all the different green trucks, let's say, for security, protection, and so forth, all right? So that's kind of like how it worked. So I got a little video here. So you may have seen a video like this before, but basically what's happening here, this is like a little replay here. You know, an insurgent had buried one of these artillery pieces, artillery shells, like 155 millimeter, underneath the asphalt, so this is like what happened, they would hire these guys to go do this kind of stuff. So some guy would go dig a hole, the next guy would, maybe dig a little bit deeper, and then the next guy would, put the artillery pieces in there. But that's a huge explosion right there. So here we go, risk identification, okay? This is our risk over there, all right? So it's pretty clear in our case, what that risk is. And this is not only, like the only risk over there, obviously. You got, just by a lot of vehicles being on the road that are very tightly together, there's still inherent dangers out there where there could be accidents, waiting to happen. A few times I was out there, and God, there'd be like another convoy coming straight at you. For some reason, the Army thought they thought they were safer by driving on the opposite side of the road. So they're not even driving on the right side of the road, and we're in the Marine Corps, so we drive on the right side of the road. But they're driving on the left-hand side of the road, coming at us, and like, what are you guys doing? So sometimes we'd have to have like these sit-down meetings with all the convoy commanders and stuff, and try to understand their thoughts and what the heck they're doing over there. So we learned a lot, by doing with not just the Army that's also out there, but also the Navy as well. So yeah, you get some weird things out there. So keep in mind also that most of these convoys are happening at night. All right, so not only is it dusty, dirty, hot all the time, but you're also operating at night. So it just adds to the danger. But most of the time also, you're also driving pretty slow. And as we learned over the course of time that the slower you went, probably the safer you were. And that was like a huge mind shift to try to change some of these guys on how to think. Because some of them thought that, well, the faster I go, I'm going to outrun that IED that, blasts like that. Well, you're not going to outrun a blast, all right, as we kind of figured out. So, all right, so here's some of our convoy risk analysis. These are some of the factors that we have to consider, when we're doing all this stuff. So, I mean, me and my guys thought about this a lot, and everybody thought about this, all right? So this is always on everybody's mind because this was the number one killer of all our guys. So things like time of day, daytime versus nighttime. What's safer? Is it safer to drive at night, when you might have more protection, so to speak? Or is it safer to drive during the daytime when you might be able to see that trigger device across the road, or maybe see some guy off to the side or something like that? So those are the kinds of things that we need to think about. Also the day of week. Their time frame over there is like their Thursday is kind of like our Friday and so forth. So maybe there might be like a lull during some of the day, maybe on a Saturday because they're going to the mosque or something, as like analogous to our Sunday kind of thing if people go to church. So those kinds of things weigh into that. Which routes? And this is something interesting here because different IED threats in different battle spaces. So in some battle spaces they would use like the radio control devices all the time. In other battle space areas they would use the trigger devices all the time. So it depended upon like the road conditions that it was, how remote it was, and who was actually making the devices. Sometimes they had expertise in a certain way, so they kind of focus on that expertise and continue to massage that. Whereas in other areas, maybe the radio control devices were being used quite heavily. So we had to think about that and, change the way that we did convoys and the way we did counter RD type stuff based upon that threat area. So if it's like a pressure plate, there was one road that was going way up north, and we decided it would be best to do those kinds of convoys during the daytime, because you had your most likely chance of actually seeing that pressure plate device across the road. But in other areas where it's just like a radar control device, we did those at nighttime. So that was the kind of things that we had to think about. The road conditions, type of road, the number of lanes, etc. Iraq had a fairly robust road network, for like the major highways. Not all roads are like that. Some of them are like really bad dirt roads and so forth. So it wouldn't matter if you had cleared that road with a bunch of engineered kind of guys, because they could have gone out there pretty quickly and put in an IED device before like the large convoys came. Small versus large convoys, number of gun truck ratios, those kinds of things are like, is it better to have like a mass armada of trucks going down the road, or is it better to have smaller groups that might be more nimble or something like that, So for us in the Marine Corps, it kind of boiled down to I think it's like around 41 vehicles or so, maybe a max of like 50 or something like that. Now the Army, they had like these huge convoys, like 100 or so, but we never wanted to go that far, because you gotta imagine though that these vehicles are going at night and they're spread out over miles. All right, so command and control of that. If you're like the convoy commander of that, I mean, it gets kind of difficult. So if you have an incident that happens where you do get an IED event or you do get attacked, you gotta stop the whole convoy. Right, so you gotta wait till the security guys come up and they can clear the area, and so then you can continue on. So sometimes they can last for hours out there. So, we decided to go with that kind of methodology. Spacing of vehicles was huge. Speed I already talked about. Is it better to like be butt to butt kind of thing, or is it better to be spaced out a little bit more, so you might have a better chance of like, avoiding the blast kind of thing if it went off. Communications, this is huge too. If you don't have communications with your convoys, it's going to be very, very difficult to control them or know where they're at. And so that was always critical. And we're asking a lot of our convoy commanders, for all this stuff because they're dealing with so many different issues. I'll talk about that in a second. But tracking convoys with GPS, we all had what's called Blue Force tracker devices on our convoys, at least 2 or 3, per convoy. Not every single vehicle had one. So you had to like maintain the kind of convoy integrity so that you would also have the tracking devices that would go with it. So hopefully it didn't get spread out and stuff too much. Weather and season, that's always a big thing. We had one of those big trucks. They had a bunch of Marines in the back, and the guy, for whatever reason, that had control of that convoy decided to cross this river stream. It was at a high point during a flood season, and the MTVR took over, and 8 of our Marines died. Because they're all in heavy gear, and they couldn't get out, and they drowned. Stuff like that was stupid, right? So, weather does play a role. You think, of Iraq as being a very desert environment, but there are times when the wadis or the riverbeds do get flooded, and it becomes quite a challenge, for some of that stuff if there's no bridge there. Religious holidays, it could be a big thing, like when the Hajj is going on, it's, the religious time period, and because they get worked up into a frenzy almost, so we had to be especially sensitive during those times that maybe we reduce the number of convoys down, so we don't have as much presence out there to, maybe incite more hatred or something like that, So we always took those kinds of things into consideration. Air support overhead, you think about, okay, I'm on the ground, but I also have a lot of air support overhead. So that could be like an attack helicopter that might be following you, something happened, they could take somebody out. Or it could be like larger aircraft from the Air Force for what's called ISR, or Intelligence, Surveillance, and Reconnaissance. You may have heard of that, especially with some of the drones that we have out there in Afghanistan right now. So they always say that they're ISR platforms. So those kinds of aircraft are critical because they can actually see stuff with their sensors that nobody else can see, and they can tell other people down below like what's coming up kind of thing. So we rely on those guys quite heavily. But they also had certain time periods they were overhead, and sometimes they weren't overhead. So we had to kind of like balance all that stuff out. So you try to optimize when you actually went out and what times they were to help to make sure that the aircraft overhead that you want them to be. Okay, so training experience of Marines and familiar to roads. This is always one of those things where you have new units coming in, and they're unfamiliar with the territory, and they go out, and it's like for the first time. You try to get as much training as possible back in the rear at Camp Pendleton or Camp Lejeune kind of thing, but the bottom line is you need some experience when you get over there, and it takes some time to learn all this stuff. So, and they call it the relief in place or the RIP, but that initial 3 or 4 weeks time period is a very critical time, when you try to get them spun up as much as possible kind of thing. All right, so bottom line is there's a lot to think about for a convoy commander. So you're that young captain, maybe about 25 years old, 26-year-old, just, not too far out of college kind of thing, and you're leading all your Marines on these convoys and stuff, you're supposed to know what to do at all times, so it's a big challenge, not only from a training and, process perspective on what is the best way of actually conducting these things, but you have to know all this technical stuff too, like all these different radios you got to talk to, my Blue Force tracker, my satellite stuff, and the jamming equipment too, so there's a lot to know for a young person like that to be able to execute these things proficiently. So a lot of times it came down to like, hey, us at the higher headquarters, we need better data to figure out what's happening down below, all right? So this is some of the things that we've kind of focused in on from our shop. And the enemy watches for patterns and always has a vote, okay? I guess parts is getting cut off on the bottom
Okay,
here.
on your right-hand side, you see that?
Light switch?
Green switch?
Green,
Yeah.
like, okay.
Oh, a little bit to your right, right.
Oh, this
Yeah.
way?
Down, down there.
Down, press down.
Oh, oh, okay.
Beautiful.
Oh, that's it.
We have to go up first.
Oh, look at that, all right, cool. So, you know, these are big events, all right? So it's not like we're like gonna be hiding a lot when it comes to like, hey, we're gonna call at 2 o'clock in the morning versus 3 o'clock in the morning or something like that. So, I mean, they're always watching you, you know? So they always have somebody watching the bases and they can call back to somebody else to let them know like when all the trucks are going and that kind of thing. Okay, so risk response, all right? So as I said, we kind of fell in on an existing process, right? So we have to examine this process and, you know, look at its pros and cons and so forth. And I think everybody kind of gave the previous guys the benefit of the doubt because this has been going on for like 3 years, all right? So we're like 3 years into this whole endeavor in Iraq by the time I get over there. And I think for me, I think personally, I thought that things would be a little bit more mature than really what they were, you know, because before then, like, units changed out like every 6 months. So every unit had a little bit way of doing their own thing, you know, so nothing was really standardized to the point that we would have liked it to have been. So, you know, but there was a process in place, you know, 72 hours to register and say deconflict a convoy. That means you got to make sure that this convoy is not going to be, you know, conflicting with some other convoy or some other kind of event that might be going on, like some other real world operation, let's say. So there's no conflict when it comes to that. And this gives enough time for the battle space owners to, you know, plan for the movement through their area. And, you know, you want to create situational awareness, providing data for future movement analysis and so forth, which proved to be critical, you know, when some of the things I'll be talking about here in a few minutes kind of thing, you know, we need that kind of data to do that kind of analysis. This GTO, the Ground Transportation Order, is a tracking system. And when I say system, it's really not a system you might think of like an information system. It's really just an Excel spreadsheet, all right, that somebody came up with. You know, date, time, you know, what's the convoy, how many gun trucks, how many, you know, commercial trucks, who's going, and stuff like that. So, you know, in my previous tour on recruiting duty, I learned a lot about Excel, and in my MBA program as well. So, you know, I was able to take this and do lots of improvement on that, but that had limitations we'll talk about later. So this is just basically, like I said, an Excel spreadsheet posted to a website. This kind of let everybody know what's going on out there, you know, that we know of. These are all the convoys that we know that are going on. And we're talking about around, you know, 50 to 100 convoys a day, you know, going on across that entire geographical area. So it's quite a bit. So how do we do that? A lot of it just through email and chat. We say work chat, but it's, you know, chat like Google Chat kind of thing. Or just plain old phone calls, you know, so nothing too very sophisticated on this stuff. So we'll be talking about this in a little bit, but, you know, for the Marine Corps, we don't have a lot of systems out there. You know, a lot of the times it's just a matter of, you know, what I have to use, let's make a decision, let's get going and do action, all right, as opposed to, you know, gotta wait for something. So a lot of times that's a Marine mentality. Okay, so this is the process that we kind of fell in on and we further refined, all right? So you can see, you know, looking at the risk stuff, those bins and so forth, you can see where the planning's going on about 96 hours out. You know, we're identifying the risk, you know, about 72 hours out. This FTB is called the Forest Transportation Board, and what that's something that I led over there, but this is like all the convoy people in the same room every single day at 9 o'clock, and we talked about all the convoys coming up, and we talked about what happened the previous night. You know, so what incidents happened, how many explosions were there, how many ID attacks, and so forth. And, you know, we just talked about those issues, and we looked at everything coming up and see, well, you know, do we agree with that or do we not agree with that? So there's a process in place now, you know, to identify that risk, because sometimes people want to leave on, you know, really dangerous roads. We actually had a color code system, so like the real dangerous roads that we knew there was a lot of activity going on were red. You know, the ones that were not so bad were yellow, and the ones that were pretty benign were green. You know, so we came up with a color code system, you know, to help identify the risk associated with that particular road. So sometimes, you know, people want to leave on a red route, and we just didn't agree with that. It says too dangerous, so we you know, made them to do something else. You know, so what we had to be mindful though that sometimes that, that red route for a short period of time might be safer than going like maybe all the way around on a less dangerous route, but it might take another 6 or 8 hours. You know, then you're out there a lot more exposed. You know, maybe it's a lesser risk, but you know, 6 or 8 hours on, you know, at night at those kinds of conditions can be pretty taxing on people after a while. You know, so we also have to take that into consideration. So there's a process in place, you know, to get approval. So eventually, you know, the GTO, the ground transportation order, gets approved, and these are all the people that are authorized to leave the base. So before you could actually leave the base, you had to have approval to do that. All right, you had to make sure that everything was all planned out, all the battle space owners knew that you were coming, you had the right security vehicles in place, and then you could actually leave the base kind of thing. You know, so, and there's always like some kind of emergency that came up too, but you know, kind of dealt with that on a one-on-one basis. And then another group called the TMCC, they actually monitor and execute. So this gets into the last piece then of your risk model of monitoring and control. So they were the ones that, you know, monitored that particular convoy as it did its route and got to the next base and then returned and so forth, and made sure that everybody got back okay. You know, so that's the beginning and the end. You know, so I think the process worked fairly well. So, but you can see that there's gaps in there, the way we're kind of doing business, let's say from an IT side or information management side, you know, that we could improve upon. So let's talk about that a little bit. All right, so process improvement. Let's, while we're on this topic, you have basically 2 different kinds of process improvement. One kind being incremental, another kind being radical, all right? So incremental improvements. This was what we did like for the first 6 months. You know, like I'm the Excel guy, so I'm out in my office between midnight and 3 a.m. every day, you know, working on the, you know, making a better spreadsheet kind of thing because I have a lot of experience with that. And working with my guys to figure out, you know, what kind of data we need to capture and so forth. So those are kind of like incremental improvements, you know, so we could publish a new version, you know, every night and everybody understood the process kind of thing. And, you know, we gradually had some better information flow. We could actually get some decent data, you know, that we could then look at the entire theater, you know, from a holistic perspective and see where things are going, when they're going, how much they're going, and so forth. All right, so that proved to be pretty critical. But when it comes to radical improvement, then you got to start thinking about something a little bit different. All right, and we'll be talking about this Tender Express program a little bit. But that's basically my timeline in Iraq. At the 6-month point, we had a pretty good process in place. We had incremental improvements to our GTO that we can then capture better data analysis. And then about the 9-month point, we initiated this Tender Express thing that we'll talk about a little bit. And by the end of the year, things are actually rolling pretty well. All right, we actually had some significant improvement in how we did business over there. Okay, so incremental process improvement. Bottom line is the current system worked. You know, it did work. You know, whether we improved anything or not, just, you know, maintain whatever was happening, it worked. But could be better, kind of thing, is what we're trying to get to. So the problems with the Excel version, labor intensive maintaining, you saw all my Marines in there, they're constantly turning away on this stuff, and they're changing these records all the time, you know, things change, you know, the time that they want to leave changes, or the route changes, and so forth. So it's not a very efficient tool for doing that kind of stuff when you start dealing with multiple users on the same kind of data source, right? So that was the issue that we were having. Data validation, there wasn't a lot of that. So a lot of it's like free-form text. And there's certain tips and tricks I'll show you in a little bit later on that you can do for data validation, but they're not perfect when it comes to like Excel. Data inconsistencies, especially naming conventions. As we figured out, nobody knows how to spell over there. I mean, a lot of these names are like Arabic. You know, like TQ, for instance. I was talking about TQ, right? The picture with all the people in there. Well, the real name is Al-Taqaidam, all right? So how do you spell Al-Taqaidam? Well, it's T-A-Q-Q-A-A-D-U-M. Well, you can spell that with 2 A's or 1 A or 2 Q's or 1 Q, or, you know, so you have, you know, or to say Taqaidam or TQ or Al-Taqaidam with a space, you know, so at the end of the day, you got like 7 different versions of the same name. So when it comes to like, you know, doing analysis and stuff, well, how many convoys do we have go to TQ? Well, the Air Force will tell you that, well, we only did about this much. Well, I looked at their data, and come to find out, they had like 8 different spellings of TQ. So if you actually looked and changed so the data was consistent, we're doing like, you know, just as much as the Air Force was. you know, but in their mind, we were doing very little because of a stupid naming convention thing like that, you know. So that stuff is very, very important, you know, when it comes, because now we're just talking about strategic level airlift, you know, being decided by misspelled words, you know, about places and stuff, you know, so it can have some big impact on what's going on. Hey, Arch, I think you got your power cable. Thank you so much. Yeah. Another thing, version control of the spreadsheet, you know, it's always a hassle, like, you know, which version you deal with. I'm sure you guys have experienced this before. You know, no history changes, that's no problem. You know, who made that change? I don't know. Data backup is always an issue. You know, hard to analyze the data. You know, what are we doing kind of thing. You know, so we need to improve this process. I mean, it's certainly better than what we fell in on, but there's definitely different things you could do to improve that. So, but also, it's less risk and minimal impact. So, I mean, the system can't stop, and so it's not hard to make incremental changes, you know, kind of thing. Okay, so one of the things we did was a written standard operating procedures, which really wasn't there before, not to the detail that we had. We improved the Excel GTO spreadsheet using macros. You guys know what a macro is? One person? Where's my smart guys over here, huh? Okay, 2 geeks over here, all right. Macro automation, that's good. You know what a pivot table is?
Yeah.
You do? All right, good. How many? Who else knows what a pivot table is? So we got 3 in a room? We got 3 Excel people? Oh, okay, good. 4? All right, good. Because that's like the most powerful feature of Excel. So if you don't know what a pivot table is, I'm going to show you what it is tonight so you can actually save a whole lot of time. So after 6 months, we had a better automated system, so to speak, but we still had some inherent Excel problems. So let's look at some observations here. If you want to look at a system, all right, and what we did was basically just use Excel and email. Email was like the process, you know, who does this email need to go to for approval for this request kind of thing. And that's a great way of capturing the workflow and all this stuff. And it's an easy way of doing that too. So Excel was like our data capture, but the email stuff was really the process flow, the functional workings, the workflows and so forth. I mean, the first 6 months I was constantly like, you know, emailing the kernel in the G3, the current operations center, for any kind of like red route approval. Like every single red route approval had to be signed off by a kernel, you know. So here I am like emailing them at 11 o'clock at night, you know, hey, sir, you know, we got this convoy leaving in the morning, do you approve of that? Yes, I do, okay. So, I mean, I don't think that guy slept really for a whole year, so, because things like that were constantly happening. So, but it's also flexible, low cost, easily adaptable to change. We didn't need any, you know, hardcore code developers. You know, most of the stuff was imported macros. Change can be a process-wise and functional-wise, and it's great for analysis. Excel is great for analysis, or any kind of business intelligence kind of application out there. But everybody uses Excel, everybody has it. So we want to focus that perspective on Excel to do the analysis piece and figuring out, you know, what's going on when and so forth, all right? But using that as a database is really not the way to go. Okay, okay, for the web stuff, all right, we finally decided that we're going to go web-based because this Excel stuff is just too much of a hassle. So, you know, we had some on-site developers that were with us. They were stationed with us. I mean, these are contractors that are getting paid, I don't know, $200,000 a year because they're in a war zone, you know. And so anyway, they were on-site support staff. We actually had a couple coders over there as part of us that actually developed this system, you know. So we worked through a series of meetings, and you know, we knew what we wanted to do because we've been through this, you know, pain of trying to figure all this stuff out. So at about the 6-month point, you know, we really started to work this hard because we knew this is where we needed to go. So I think, yeah, about the 9-month point, the first version came online. You know, as using an Access database as a back end, and it worked out okay. This is another thing with systems implementation stuff. Like, how do you actually implement that? So, you know, I think we tried to implement it by unit kind of thing, but you know, bottom line is like within like 2 days, everybody was up and running on the new web-based system. All right, so that just worked out better to do it that way. But eventually, though, we use SQL Server. So if you're familiar with that as a database, we use that in the back end because it just works better than Access at the time. And it's a more robust enterprise level database system. So lots of advantages to that, you know, by going to the web. You know, the data is consistent. You have a lot better version control. You have track history of changes, you know, to your request. You know who signed in. I mean, there's login authentication that says, like, you know, okay, who did all these changes and so forth. So it just basically streamlined the whole process, you know, tremendously. But though, some observations. You know, it was easy making changes in Excel, not so easy in the web-based version. You know, now you got to work with, you know, somebody else and, you know, talk to the developer, and now you got to work out all these coding issues, and it might take a little bit of time, you know, to get some of these changes, you know, implemented. So you better know what you want from the beginning, and that's why I'm glad, in retrospect, that we were able to go through that 6 months of pain, because we really knew the process, we really knew what data we wanted, and we knew where we wanted to go. So that was critical. And like I said, less developmental control. We're going to protect for process improvement in Excel. I mean, now you can really get this out to everybody, and now you just have to manage like usernames and logins and so forth. But data was going to be good. You know, that was the key critical piece that you wanted to have with all that stuff. At the end of the day, you need to have the right data to actually do some real good analysis. All right, because that would help us improve our counter IED effort, you know, kind of thing. You can see the rest in there. So benefits overall, fairly low risk with each upgrade, especially with the Excel stuff. At the end of the day, once we got our web-based system in place, we were saving about 100 hours a week. All right, so that means like sleep time for our guys, you know, instead of like you know, working 18 hours a day a little bit that most of us did. So, you know, that tremendously helped out everybody, not just us at the higher level command, but everybody else below us. You know, it's much easier to, you know, get your input in there, get it approved in the process. It gives more time to everybody to plan this out, you know, so it was much better doing it this way. Less time maintaining. That was our hardest challenge, like maintaining the spreadsheet, you know. You don't want to be wasting your time doing that over there. And you don't need maybe as many people anymore. You know, for the next rotation, maybe you could have 2 or 3 Marines or less. You know, they can stay back in the rear or do other things other than like, hey, you're going to be the Excel spreadsheet guy, you know, sitting in a trailer in Fallujah. You know, hey, sign me up. That's what I joined the Marine Corps for, right? I want to go kill people, you know, and I'm going to be working on a spreadsheet. But, you know, we were able to do some of that stuff, so we were able to reduce our staff a little bit, or maybe be a little more flexible when it came to like sending people home and so forth. Minimal organizational change. Organizational type issues are always out there, so anytime you deal with an information system, there's always an organizational issue with that. You know, you have to get people trained on this, you know, how they work the system and so forth. So don't ever forget that part, because that can lead to some of your biggest challenges. And you have to get senior level buy-in. You know, you need to have some top cover from, you know, the generals above you that this is a good thing. Now in our case, I think we just kind of did it because, you know, common mid-control was maybe not the most critical aspect of everything going on in Iraq with everything else going on. So we were able to do this pretty much at a lower level, I think, and just make it happen. Now, here's a point here. Debatable whether we made an impact to reducing IED, but impacted the Marines managing the control process. I know we made an impact to everybody involved with this process. Now, at this time, did we really make an impact to the guys actually out there on the road all the time? I really don't think so necessarily. We were able to probably make some better decisions based upon their movement patterns, like for certain units. A lot of times, units like moved every single day at the same time. You know, there's a repeating pattern kind of thing. So if you know anything about, you know, some of the intelligence side, you want to be random. You want to be variable, right? You don't want to have the same pattern all the time. So we're able to figure that out a whole lot easier now. Now they had good data. So then you can, you know, go talk to the unit and say, hey, why are you leaving the same exact time every single day, kind of thing. You know, I'm trying to vary that as much as possible. Lesson learned: KISS, keep it simple, stupid. You know, that pays huge dividends. All right, so don't try to be so fancy with some of these solutions that you're missing the point. All right, like us, we kept it simple for the first 6 months. I think we had a pretty good plan to make it web-based, and we kind of kept it simple from there. You know. So everything is hard in wartime, all right? Everything is hard. You know, we got to deal with all kinds of challenges, and on top of that, of your daily business, you're trying to make improvements across the board for everybody, all right? So that makes it more difficult to do that. Okay, so now we have a better system, better analysis we can do. So how to reduce risk? Remember, the mission is to get supplies from point A to point B, reduce the risk of IEDs and so forth, all right? So we have better data capture. The data is validated now. Now we don't have any misspelled words anymore, which is huge. Data is consistent. It's stored in one place. It's easily accessible. I'm sure you heard the term GIGO, garbage in, garbage out kind of thing. So that was an issue. We kind of eliminated that, at least in our case. And here's the important thing about this, all right? There's an opportunity cost, for using poor systems like this, that we kind of fell in at. Time is a limited resource, You can work 24 hours a day, but you can't do it. You can't sustain that for a year, all right? So as much as people try to do some of that kind of stuff over there, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint, all right? So time is a limited resource. So you should be thinking about, using your experience of your professional knowledge over years in the Marine Corps to think about those kinds of problems and not be worrying about the grunt work, let's say, of, maintaining an Excel spreadsheet. That's not where your expertise should be used. That's not where your time should be used. Your time should be focused in on things that you know about that you can have an impact in, not worry about what kind of report that I want to generate and so forth. So most experts in the field didn't know anything about data analysis, which is true, and the enemy doesn't care. Bottom line is the enemy doesn't care. They're going to do what they're going to do no matter what. So it's up to us to be better time managers and identify some of these risks and how we can reduce that at the route so that we're putting our experience and expertise in valuable ways and we're not wasting our time. I found that again and again over there where I have like an intel analyst, a gunnery sergeant, who's spending like 45 hours a week creating reports on like what's happening with IEDs across the different battle space areas, because he's struggling with Excel. He doesn't know how to create reports. He has these stupid spreadsheets that it takes so much time to analyze because he's using all these fancy formulas and trying to link formulas between different workbooks and worksheets to add up how many radio control devices versus tripwire kind of thing. It's ridiculous. He should be thinking about the fight, right? I mean, that's what his expertise is in, not trying to fight the computer, right? So we need to automate that as much as possible. Okay, so now we're at the 6-month mark. All right, I'm going to put you guys in my shoes. What do we do now? All right, so we finally got some incremental type of improvements. So again, what's our mission? Deliver supplies from point A to point B, right? So how can we do this better, safer, and faster? So any thoughts from anyone? You've seen the lay of the land. You know what you're fighting. You're fighting an enemy that's very smart. They're always watching you. They're very adaptable. So as you change your tactics and procedures, they adjust accordingly. So it's a constant cat and mouse kind of game over there. So if you're my shoes over there, what are some ideas that you might have for trying to make some of these convoys safer? But the bottom line is, you need to deliver supplies from point A to point B. All right. So how can you do it safer?
Exploit your enemy's limitations. So know what limitations your enemies have, what constraints they have, and
Okay.
exploit those in order to work around, to use those to your advantage.
Okay. Well, that's definitely something we try to do all the time. What do you think some of the enemy's constraints would be?
Technology.
Technology? Well, they actually were fairly sophisticated.
I mean, they can build a makeshift bomb, but beyond that, what?
Well, they don't have a huge amount of technology, let's say. I mean, it's not like they're shooting artillery.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. But they had mortars, though. They had lots of mortars and rockets, I'd say they're very good at it.
Yeah, right.
Because I don't know how many times they're like lobbing them into Camp Fallujah, and they didn't hit anything. There was one time I was like driving back from the chow hall and they had like a launch of mortars and God, like the mortars were right in the ground and driving by and the little tail thing was like spinning and stuff. So like, oh shit, I guess that didn't blow up. So good thing. So that was interesting. But yeah, nothing like really big or heavy. But they did have some decent technology. I mean, they were able to have what's called EFPs, like explosively formed projectile, like at least in the Baghdad area, where they could actually penetrate our armor. That we spent all these billions of dollars on, to make our vehicles safer. So it's like one of those shrapnel rounds, I guess, where it like injects like this thing of copper right into it, and blasts inside. So they did have some of that stuff, but most of the time it's just your rudimentary 155 millimeter artillery shell that was connected together. You know, you've probably seen the movie The Hurt Locker and stuff, right? You know, so there's scenes in there where they show these projectiles and stuff, and then the EOD guys are out there to try to dismantle that stuff. So anyway, okay, so that's a good point, you know. And you did see some of the seasonal shift, you know, like constraints, like, you know, religion is a constraint in a way because they don't do certain things on certain religious holidays, perhaps. Or it gets cold, you know. I mean, they're just like you and me. Do they want to be out there in the cold, you know, like digging a hole or something like that? So you did see a lull, you know, or drop off in some IED activity, you know, certain times of day or, you know, something like that, or seasonal type things, you know.
Or
So
in the areas where they do it remotely, you can use sandstorms.
oh, the sandstorms, yeah, those are bad. I recommend never being in a sandstorm, you know. But they weren't so bad in Iraq. In Kuwait, they're a lot worse, actually. I got stuck in one with my brother, as a matter of fact, out in the western parts of Kuwait. And yeah, you ever see the movie Star Wars, right? You know, it's like Planet Tatooine out there, right? I was looking for the sand people to show up somewhere. That was bad. Any ideas? Any other ideas? Okay, well, how would you just eliminate convoys in general? I mean, how would you do that? I mean, get rid of the problem, all right? The problem is that we have trucks on the road, you know, delivering supplies. So how do you get rid of the problem? Airlift, okay, good idea. How about that? How about we fly the cargo? All right, so this was an evolution, like a, you know, a second order effect, let's say, of having good data analysis. Now I can actually tell the Air Force how much we're moving back and forth between point A and point B. And not only that, now they can actually allocate aircraft because we can now justify it based upon the good data analysis that we had. So I got there in February. By the end of May, I think, you know, I put all this analysis together between two different major hubs, TQ and this other place called Al-Assad. And I was able to justify to the Air Force, you know, hey, we're actually moving this amount of stuff, you know, which was never done before. And every time that the Marines did it before then, the data analysis is always bad, you know, and we can never, you know, continue to receive that kind of support because we can never prove they actually did what we said we did, you know, because we didn't, I don't know, other people thought maybe it wasn't important, you know, or didn't know how to do it. So anyway, that was a huge win for us because now we can get like a C-17 to fly between these two major airfields, and that began a process called, an initiative called the Tender Express. So instead of using C-17s and C-130s, which are military aircraft that, you know, are limited resource again, like everything is a limited resource, we could then outsource it to this commercial aircraft called an IL-76. So an IL-76 is a very common cargo aircraft in that area of the world. You know, it's a Soviet aircraft that's used quite a bit, you know, in Middle East, Asia, Africa as well, I guess. And that proved to be a very, very important thing that we did, because now at the end of the day, we went from a convoy like every 3 days to like a convoy every 3 weeks. So you can do the numbers and stuff, like how many people that affects, vehicles and so forth, and it became a very important program, not only for Iraq, but also places in Afghanistan as well. So we had to change our business process though. So this is part of the deal, all right? So you want to think radically about, you know, how can it make a real impact? All right, well now you have to change your business process. So now you're halfway through the deployment, you're used to doing certain things, now you have to build pallets and logistical supplies for air pallets versus truck pallets, or warehouse pallets as we say. So that's a change in the business process. So we had to work closely with the guys to do that, and work closely with the Air Force that's actually managing all this stuff. You know, so there's a lot to work through, but I had the right guy came into place, Carl Bailey, and he taught me more about distribution at this kind of level than anybody else I did. And he was able to make this happen and work with the right people and get the right people in place that actually make this happen, using the existing systems that, you know, that we're supposed to, that we never really paid much attention to because we never had a need to, but now we had a need and now we had to figure it out. You know, so Marines are pretty good at that, trying to figure things out and go with that.